Hey, deserving listeners, it's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from the last 2 weeks. Let's get to it. Love is Blind, Season 3 episodes. I'm just going to lump the last couple weeks into one section here. Banana Slug says, I wonder if Zeneb has abandonment issues because her parents are deceased. Is that a thing? Absolutely, that's a thing. I don't know if I've talked about it, but I should have, in that I don't know for Zeneb. I don't know her issues. We barely know anything about her history. But absolutely, people who have parents who die will potentially develop abandonment issues. Normally, when we're talking about abandonment issues, we're talking about a parent who, voluntarily abandons their children, a divorce or something, and the parent moves away or doesn't hang out with the kids very much or at all, and it's obvious abandonment. But there are other situations where a parent might be ill, mentally ill, physically ill, or might die. And particularly the younger you are as a child, although intellectually you might understand that the parent didn't choose to leave you, it emotionally feels like an abandonment. And you will find that even adults, when they have a loved one that dies, a very, very close one, like if someone has a spouse that dies, and it's a couple years after the death, and they're single and they're struggling with raising the kids by themselves and paying the bills by themselves, and they're lonely and they're hurt and they're angry and frustrated. That, not universal, but for many people in that situation, they'll get angry at their spouse for dying, even though, of course, their spouse didn't choose to die. Say it was cancer or something. And they might say, like, I can't believe you abandoned me. You left me here with all of this stuff, and I'm alone now, and you're now in heaven or resting in peace, and I'm dealing with all the fallout of all this. I'm dealing with the sadness and the practicality of being a single parent. Like, I'm angry at you. Now, of course, the individual doesn't actually blame the person that died, but it's normal to have that feeling. Now, if you're a child, you might actually believe that the parents left you on purpose or something like that. It's odd. Children, we tend to think of them as little adults, like they have brains like that, and to some extent they do, but in many respects they do not. I often bring up this example. I had a family that was going through divorce, and the 10-year-old kid, I noticed that he was struggling, and eventually he told me that the divorce that his parents were going through was his fault. And I said, oh, what's going on? And he said, well, one day my dad told me to mow the lawn, and I was procrastinating about mowing the lawn. And my dad came downstairs and said, hey, stop playing video games, mow the lawn. And then I procrastinated more because I was being bad. And then later that night, my parents came downstairs from the bedroom, and they sat us all down and told us that they were going to be separating and that they were going to get a divorce. So it's my fault. If I had mowed the lawn, then my parents would still be together today. Now, of course, when we hear that, we're like, there's absolutely no possible way that the reason why the parents divorced was because he didn't mow the lawn. But to a child, even to a 10-year-old, it can seem rational because children don't know stuff. They don't know things. And it's normal to have those misunderstandings. And so can a child who loses their parents and the parents die, can they believe that they weren't good enough or that the parents didn't love them enough? Could there be an element of that? Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, that can lead to issues down the line. For example, the only other person I can think of on reality TV that relates to this is with Biniam and Ariella on 90 Day Fiancé, if you're familiar. Biniam also had his parents die when he was young. I think he was younger than Zeneb. He was like 7 or something. And my hypothesis is that because the parents weren't there, he wasn't getting enough attunement and thus had to retreat into an avoidant attachment style. I don't know if that's true, but it seems absolutely possible, and I've seen that before. Similarly, if you have a parent that is ill, that is sick, that is in the hospital that is depressed, that absolutely also can cause a child to feel abandoned and to have a lack of attunement. Abandonable Snowman, good old Abandonable Snowman, says, "Me, after reading about SK's whole mess, I've concluded that Kirk should definitely keep his conspiracy mindedness." Yeah, so I don't know. I'm trying to avoid spoilers. There's been a lot of revelations coming out on their Instagram pages and other interviews. And I'm going to try to watch a lot of that stuff and react to it. But I have heard that SK and Raven had some dubiousness is after the reunion that were revealed. Like SK had two other partners at the same time as Raven or something like that. And yeah, actually, it's interesting. So I've already started to watch some of those interviews. I've only posted a little bit of it, but and the little bit that I've learned, some of it has aligned with my conspiracy mindedness. So yeah, it's it kind of validates it. I mean, for me, these what I call conspiracy theories, and I guess you could argue that that is an appropriate word, but maybe not. Anyway, those conceptualizations of which I am completely speculating about, to me, is the only explanation for a lot of the behavior that we see on these shows. That behind the scenes, the producers and the cast members are saying things and planning things that aren't necessarily obvious as they're being on the show. Nita says, "One thing I can't stand about this show's reunion, about Love is Blind reunions, is how they treat the people who chose not to get married versus the people who got married." By the way, I've been podcasting all day, audio podcasting, and my voice is a little ragged. So my wife thought I was getting sick, and I'm like, no, I've just been yammering into the microphone all day. But Nita says, "One thing I can't stand about the show's reunions is how they treat the people who chose not to get married versus the people who got married. They really don't challenge or hold the married couples accountable for their behavior. Matt was aggressive and abusive, and no one on stage called him out on that. Not the host, other participants, or even Colleen." End of comment. Yeah, it isn't. I hadn't thought about that, Nita, but I think that's true. And I have a conspiracy about that, in that the producers of the show have an agenda to, one, encourage the people to get married. Because I think the producers, at least me as an audience member, I think they misunderstand what the audience wants. For me, what I want is what really happened. If Shayna, for example, when she finally met Kyle in person, it was, she had said she just didn't feel it, that there was no spark there. There was perhaps a little bit of a spark in the pods, or she agreed to get engaged to him in the pods because she was rejected by Shane, if you remember. Because she thought, well, maybe when I meet Kyle, something will grow. And then within hours of seeing Kyle in person, she's like, nope, and then she left. Which I imagine a lot of people would do. But the show is very intent on getting people to the altar and only revealing what they feel at the altar. And to keep up the ruse, I believe the producers will have contracts with a lot of threatening language that will be scary to the cast members if they don't adhere to that. Also, they engineer things through emotional manipulation, this kind of thing. Anyway, so one of the conspiracies I think that I have is that the producers believe that the audience wants people to get married. And they want drama, of course, but they want marriages. I feel like the producers, if no one ever got married on the show, or the marriages that happened weren't exactly healthy, I feel like the producers would feel like they failed, or that the show isn't valid or something, similar to Married at First Sight. The three people that engineer the matchmaking, they seem pretty biased to make sure that people get married and stay married when all evidence is suggesting those individuals should not stay married. You know what I mean? So I think that when they get to the reunion, the producers sit down pre and as they're editing, and they're like, okay, how do we make the married people look perfect and wonderful? And it's this, and maybe it's affected by the first season when you had Lauren and Cam, which in some ways is one of the only couples that you can really stand behind and say like, and cheer about, you know, because I think there are some red flags with Amber and Barnett. And then the season 2 couples, I don't think either one of those couples is still together. Sorry, I have allergies coming up. But so I think they sit down and they're like, okay, we gotta make these couples look healthy and happy, and then everyone can cheer and can feel good about romance. And sure, if it's true, but if there are red flags, then to engineer the reunion in that way feels strange. It feels like the producers are missing something. They're ignoring something. With Matt and Colleen, you could argue, I don't know if I would make this argument, but you could argue that they are supporting the oppression of women and the abuse of women and ignoring the red flags of potential abuse that's happening there. We don't know. We only saw a little bit. But I think that, it's interesting that you point that out. I hadn't noticed that. And then, of course, the flip side is for the individuals that broke up, they tend to really highlight their unhealthiness and they will show their issues, right? And it's interesting to think about. Yeah, I just wish that, but you know, these shows are massive successes. There's a lot of reality TV out there, and Love is Blind is one of the most popular TV shows of all time, let alone reality TV. And so what do I know about what makes an interesting show? I'm guessing if they followed my advice, the show would be so real that it would be boring. So, what do I know? Sam says, can I just say I love your intro, how you just dive right into the episode. I appreciate it so much that I don't have to skip through a drawn-out promo until the actual video starts. End of comment. Yeah. So I do that because when I listen to podcasts and when I watch YouTube, I hate long introductions of channels that I regularly watch. And I learned this a long time ago. And it kind of, it goes even back before YouTube and podcasting, when I, as a songwriter, I would be I feel like in the 80s and 90s, there was a tendency to have these really long introductions to a song. And I found as a listener to music that I often just wanted them to get to the point of the song, get to the beginning of the good part of the song. Like, I mean, sometimes intros are amazing. You think of a good Pink Floyd song with a really spacey beginning. And yeah, for sure. But a lot of times it just felt kind of self-indulgent. And I found myself as a songwriter, I'd feel like, well, I have to write an intro, right? I mean, that's what everyone else does. So I'd be like, okay, I gotta create this bit and maybe I'll introduce. And sometimes it would work for me, but other times I'd feel like I was trying to adhere to a rule of songwriting that it just didn't feel natural to me. And when I eventually started to just write songs that just started, like sometimes really, really right at the first word, you know, because sometimes they'll do an instrumental, then the singer will come in. Some of the songs I'd just be like, let's just start when I start singing, you know, just. And so then when I started doing podcasting, I started to have these really long intros because that's what everyone else is doing. Music, and then there'd be blabbing at the beginning of the episode where you check in, how you doing? Oh, the weather, you know, because that's what people do on news channels, and that's what TV does. And then as time went on, and I'd be listening to podcasts myself, I would, again, particularly podcasts that I listen to a lot, and you know, like on Netflix, they allow you to skip the intro now, which I just find brilliant, right? Because how many times do you need to see the intro of a TV show that you've seen countless times? Like if you're watching Friends, for example, how many times have you heard that song and seen that intro, which I really dislike, by the way, them dancing in that fountain. They look so goofy. It's cringy. I'm just like, oh, just get to the show. you know. So after a while, I started to get annoyed with my own intros of my own episodes, and I started to shorten them and shorten them and shorten them to the point where I try to make them as short as possible. If I had it my way, I wouldn't even have the tiny intro that I have, right? Now, I will say there are some times where I have a very long intro. I try to limit that. But sometimes I'll have some disclosures that I get rambly about, and I don't like that, but sometimes I'm like, oh, I have to do that. Sometimes I'll do a rambling intro, and I'll just cut it out, half of it, later on when I'm editing it. So yeah, Sam, I'm glad that you are like me and that you hate content that has long intro. Another aspect of that I was listening to a podcast the other day. I won't name it, but it's a popular one, and it looked like a really interesting topic that I wanted to know about. And they start out the podcast by, I guess there's multiple hosts, by doing check-ins and being like, how are you doing? Oh, yeah. Well, we have that event coming up, and oh, yeah, if you want to sign up on the, and I'm just like, can you get to that later? Like, just get into the goddamn topic. And if in the middle or at the end you want to do the check-in and the announcements and stuff, like, sure. If you're a fan, then you'll sit through that. And if you're not, then you won't. Like, just get to the topic. But here I am yammering about that, which is boring. Archer says, I really love the sentiment about being okay with not knowing. Right, so I was talking about how, I can't remember how I got there, but I was saying all of our speculations about these individuals on Love is Blind, we can't really know the answer to these questions. There are some things we might know, but there are a lot of things that we're just taking a guess on very little information. I'm often saying that. And I'm not just saying that to cover my butt legally. I literally believe that. And I struggle sometimes with that principle. Sometimes I will assert things or believe things based on very little information and start to fall in love with my own conceptualizations and my own speculations, when one of the most intelligent and most wisest thing you could ever believe or think is, I don't know. I don't know. I think this, but what do I know? Who knows? Until I have more information, I'll assume that I don't really know enough information. But when people are watching these reality shows, and really in a lot of things in life, people, once they have a tiny bit of information that gives them the ability to lock in on a conceptualization, and often that conceptualization is heavily within their bias and their own experience and their own, they have a bone to pick often, then they confirmation bias, and they just lock in on it. And anything other than that is ridiculous and stupid, and I can certainly be that way myself. So I was talking about how we should be okay and take a deep breath and say, like, you know what? I don't know the answer. I don't know what's really happening here. I have some ideas, but I don't know, and that's okay. And I might not ever know. In fact, there's a extremely high likelihood that all of the conceptualizations that we might have about these cast members, we will never know the answer, because even if they do interviews, we can't know if, for example, with Colleen, do we know if she's being abused or not? There's no way for us to know, because even if she does interviews, she might be lying, right? Even if she came out and said she was being abused, we don't know because we weren't there. People lie about that too sometimes. Rare, but sometimes. So we have to be okay that we don't know. That's important for a lot of reasons. Reality TV, maybe it's not so important, but when it comes to other more important things, like if you have a medical symptom, for example, and you're trying to figure out, you go to a doctor and they do an examination and they can't really figure it out, and you start to Google things and you start to wonder, what is it? it's okay to not know. And there's a possibility that you'll never know. And we just have to accept that. We come from a society, sometimes particularly around medicine and psychology, that proposes this notion that there's an answer out there for everyone, that science has figured everything out, and we can run a test and we will know exactly what is wrong with you. And that is just not true. If you've ever had a sort of mysterious medical condition, which there are many, you know that you can go to 100 different specialists and they'll say, like, well, I don't know, it kind of looks like this. Let's try this. We don't know. Psychology is even more in that direction. So, I've had clients who have come to me with brain fog or memory problems or energy problems, and we look at it from all different angles and provide all sorts of medication treatment, lifestyle changes, psychotherapy methods, exposure therapy, CBT, exploration, support, attachment, and it doesn't go away. And we're like, I don't know. It sucks that you're going through that. Who knows what's going on? Neurocognitive assessments. So it sucks, but like taxes and death, there are certain things about life that suck that are things that we just have to accept that are true. And not knowing is, I think, one of those. So Archer says, I really love the sentiment about being okay with not knowing. I think as entertainment goes, we get so invested in these parasocial relationships. Yeah. Celine says, 2 of my friends sided with Zay after watching the Cuties clip, saying Cole was body shaming. That's interesting. I was surprised, but also both friends are sensitive and have issues surrounding their weight. Funny how insecurities can really cause these kinds of distortions. It's very eye-opening. Interesting, yeah. Willie says, Cole reminds me of Homer Simpson working in the nuclear power plant. He has no idea what he's doing, and one wrong action could lead to a core meltdown. Yeah, my dog is barking. All right, let's go to 90 Day Fiance, Big Ed, number 58, when they go to couple therapy. Carter says, Dr. Honda, are you afraid that when couples in abusive relationships go to therapy together, so I was talking about how, and I occasionally will talk about this, that the topic of couple therapy, when the therapist detects potential abuse happening in the relationship, is a very complicated, very nuanced question treatment-wise. And you can listen to that whole episode for that. I mean, I didn't go into a ton of detail, but a little bit. And to summarize, what I was saying was that among a lot of people, and often among therapists, which is wrong, they will say it's unethical to treat a couple if you believe that there is abuse happening in the relationship. And it's similar to these ridiculous notions among therapists that it's unethical to treat someone who is in the midst of an addiction. And I won't go down that road. Now, might you be enabling a client who has an addiction by treating them in a particular way? Sure. Might you be contributing to the problem? Sure, but not automatically. Similarly, with a couple that has signs of abuse or even confirmed abuse happening, might the couple therapy contribute to the abuse happening more? Yeah, absolutely. But it's not automatic. It's just not. I mean, evidence demonstrates that a lot. So anyway, I was talking about that. And Carter says, Dr. Honda, are you afraid that when couples in abusive relationships go to therapy together and share their fears, that the abusive partner will use those fears against their spouse to keep them under control? End of comment. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm afraid of it. Like I'm like, oh no, I address it. I talk about it. I assess. I speak individually with each person. I try to make the potential seeming victim comfortable enough with me that they can tell me what's going on behind the scenes. So I'm not afraid. I am concerned with that, but I address it. And if I determine that I can't determine if abuse is happening as a result of anything, let alone my treatment, then yeah, I would refer them and But even that, it's hard. As I said in the episode, what if I determine? So let's say I have a couple, and there's confirmed abuse, like the husband. Let's say he's the abusive one. He admits that in the past, and he's working on it now, that he has hit his wife when he gets upset, and that he hasn't hit her in a year, but that's over now. And as I assess things with him, I determine that he has very limited self-awareness around his anger problem and his emotional abuse and pressure and intimidation of his wife. And although he doesn't hit his wife anymore, he's still threatening her or intimidating her in a way. And I determine that. So I have that knowledge. He's admitted, and there's evidence. I see it before me. I hear from the wife in individual meetings with her that he is very frequently intimidating and frequently flies off the handle, entitlement, the whole thing. He had parents that had a similar relationship. And then I hear from the wife in an individual meeting that when we talk about certain topics in therapy, and say I confront the husband and say, okay, I think you need to work on that because of this. Or I ask the wife how she feels about something, and she's a little shy, and I say, you can say. And then she reveals how she feels, and then the husband goes home. They go home, and he's like, he's nice in therapy, but then when they go home, he verbally and emotionally abuses her for the rest of the week because of the things that she said in therapy to me. And says, you better not tell Kirk about our conversations right now because I'm going to get you. Okay. But she doesn't tell me that because she is afraid to tell me that because she's afraid of being abused. All right. So let's say that's what's happening. I'm only aware of some of that. And as I'm treating them, say a month goes by, and I start to get this, and I get the impression that I'm not getting the full story from the victim. And the husband is not changing very quickly, and he's having a really hard time admitting that he can be intimidating and overreactive. So in that situation, for a lot of people, they say, well, automatically you have to refer them. Okay, but here's the dilemma. Let's say that I do that. How do I do that exactly? Because if I tell them my true feelings, it would be basically what I just said. But that would be pretty upsetting to the husband, right? Because he's not ready to hear that. And it could contribute to more abuse happening, because if I refer them and they're like, why are you terminating with us? Why are you firing us as clients? And I have to say something, right? So if I say anything in that direction, that could be yet another thing that he could go home and abuse her about. It's like, he fired us because you told him and I'm going to get you. Okay. So what do I say exactly that would help the couple, help the victim, and also avoid raising the risk of the victim being abused further and more abused? Okay. So what do I say? What if I said something like, well, I think it would be a good idea for a time, I don't know how long, but let's have each of you go to individual therapy. We'll stop couple therapy and have you go to individual therapy for a time. And then once you work on the following issues, then we can return to couple therapy. And for the wife, I kind of make up a few things, relevant, true things, but not really critical things. But to the husband, there are very critical bullet points of, you have to work on your anger, you have to work on your intimidation, you have to work on how you communicate. And in couple therapy, this is too triggering for the two of you. I've had these conversations before and used this language that in couple therapy, it's too triggering, it's too intense. And so we need to slow things down for a bit, and individual therapy has that ability to kind of slow things down so that you can be more calm as you are trying to explore these things and change. And then once we kind of get that foundation, we can return to couple therapy, and the two of you will be able to handle the triggers and the intensity of couple therapy. Okay. So let's say I say that, and I get very little indication that the husband is willing to actually go into individual therapy. like the wife tells me, she's like, look, if you recommend individual therapy, she tells me this one-on-one, if you recommend individual therapy to my husband, he's not going to go because I can barely get him to come to these sessions. So as I'm recommending that, I'm doing what supposedly I'm supposed to do by referring them, but I'm 99% sure, based on all the data, including statements from the victim, the wife, that by me referring them, by me terminating them, he's never going to go to therapy ever again. So in what way is that helpful to them that I'm referring them? Now, you could argue, look, you can't participate in an abusive situation. You just can't. You give them the option. It's up to him. And if he decides not to go, then that's on him. And it's hard. It's a kind of a no-win situation, right? Because in a perfect world, you'd wave a magic wand and the abuse would stop, right? So what do? It's hard to know. Every situation is different. Every therapist is different. You obviously consult with an expert. You consult with a colleague. If you have a supervisor, you talk with them. You might even talk with a legal and ethics expert, an attorney. It's complicated. When those things happen, that's what I do. I consult, document, and take an action based on those consultations. So it's not cut and dry. It's hard to know. It's really easy for people to be like, well, if there's abuse, refer. And you're like, well, let's look at that closer. Now, if I believe he will go to individual therapy, and I believe there's a good chance that that therapy will help over time, then referring would be much easier for me, right? And I could do it with a lot more certainty that I am actually helping the couple and the victim by referring them. Anyway, now, on the other hand, let's say that I decide in the end, after consulting with attorneys and consultants, that I'm going to kind of reluctantly, to some extent, keep the couple. I'll refer, but I won't terminate. So I'll be like, I really think the two of you need individual therapy. What do you think? And I get this, and I go, I don't know. And then I retain them as a couple in therapy, and the husband is like, I'm not going to work with another therapist. Okay, what do I do? Well, I do still have some options. One is I can actually start to meet more often alone with each person, giving the victim more of a chance to tell me what's really happening and to talk in confidence. Let's say eventually she tells me, my husband uses what we talk about in therapy against me and abuses me because of that. And then I would say, okay, so what do you want to do here? And we might decide, and I've been down this road, we might decide, okay, I, as a therapist, I'm going to try to be careful about what I tell your husband in terms of what we talk about, both in our individual meetings and also in couple therapy, because I don't want to give him more reason to hurt you while we're trying to get him to stop doing this, okay? So I might do something like that. When I'm talking alone with the abusive person, I am starting to work on their individual issues. And I would have to do it in a way that they didn't detect, because if they aren't ready to admit that they are part of the problem, because a lot of abusive people are like that, then I have to be really slow, or not slow, but I have to not step on any landmines. So I have to, like, for example, I might say something like, how are you feeling? And this is often the road to the good place, to health and to change for the abusive person, is eventually I'm trying to help them to admit to me that they feel lonely. A lot of abusive people actually do feel lonely. Now, you can decide whether or not you have sympathy for that, but at the root of it is loneliness and abandonment and sadness, and they're covering it up with and they're trying to manage it through abuse. And so not all abusive people, but for many. And so if I can get them to that place, because that's easier to admit. It's hard, but it's easier to admit than I'm abusive, right? It's easier to admit I'm lonely than I'm abusive. So we start with I'm lonely, and I feel like my wife doesn't really care about my feelings. I feel like she never listens to me, that kind of thing. Okay, and then he starts to get a little agitated in session and be like, okay, well, okay, tell me more about the sadness. Tell me more about the loneliness. We can get to the anger later, but stick with it. And I'm encouraging that awareness, and that's huge as a path for a lot of abusive people. If they can, there's so many. I won't go into details, but so many treatment positives and implications and roads that branch off from that place once we can fully acknowledge and experience that in therapy. And then I would start to get to a place where I might say, okay, well, when you're lonely, what emotion do you notice? Okay, then I'd hope that he would admit that he doesn't consciously register his loneliness and his rejection pain, but he does register certain sentences in his mind that are aggressive, like, well, she needs to listen to me, or I'm going to have a talk with her when she gets home, or something like that. That's what consciously registers to him. And so if I could, this is the model that I talk about all the time. And if I can make those connections, then I can start to say, well, isn't it interesting that that's the one solution that you always go to, blah, blah, blah. And connecting it to his childhood. So that's one direction. Another direction is just to be super heavy-handed with, and I've done this before too. If I believe it's the best option. It doesn't sound great on paper, but sometimes it is the best option, where I just go after the abusive person. I just be like, so I'm going to tell you. Often I'll do this if I think they're probably going to burn out of therapy anyway, that like the abusive person is very reluctantly there in therapy. And so I will just lay it out on the line. I won't be mean, but I'll be honest and say, well, here's what I see. I'm going to use the word abuse because here's how I define it. Here's what I've heard. I don't know if it's happening, but here's what I'm hearing. And I'm actually, when I talk to you, husband, I get intimidated. Like you make me afraid, and you're not even abusing me directly, but you give off a very scary vibe. And so I know that's not easy to hear, but I'm a professional, and maybe I'm biased. I don't know, but this is my professional opinion. I've given a lot of thought. And so if the two of you want to improve things, then that has to stop. I could recommend a lot of different roads that we could go down, or you could go down in other venues, but that's priority number one, because intimidation and fear-based communication is just a destroyer of love and attachment and goodwill. So if you're trying to improve your marriage, that's absolutely the top priority. And I would say to the victim, I don't know if you're going through this, but if your feelings are anything like mine when I'm around him, I can't imagine how much fear you're feeling, and that's not okay. It's terrible that you're going through that. It's abusive. You're going through that. I've done that before. Sometimes that even works. It's funny that I would say. Sometimes that works very well, very quickly, because to some abusive people, they appreciate the honesty, depending, if I land it right. But anyway, point is case-by-case basis, lots of nuance. The key is what helps. How am I, as a therapist, actually going to help the victim to not be abused anymore? Which ends up actually helping both people, because the abusive person loses their abusive behavior and gains a real partner that actually cares about them, or at the very least has the possibility of being with another person that actually loves them for who they are and doesn't love them because they're scared, or acts like they love them because they're scared, right? So everyone wins if I can help the victim. And I believe it's the moral, ethical thing to do, obviously. So every situation is different, and we're often, as therapists, operating on pretty limited information. But anyway, and like I said, if you're a clinician, consult. It's experts, others. Because the other thing is, when you're doing this kind of work, it can induce a lot of countertransference, right? And so it's hard to think straight, and you need other people to help you. All right. Ms. Mina says, I agree. So this is Big Ed episode. I agree 99% with Dr. Kirk on everything, but one thing I don't understand. In a relationship, do you need to reassure your love to your partner over and over again if you have told them that you love them? To me, it would feel like pressure. I understand that the other one can feel insecure, but that would be an issue they would need to work out on their own. End of comment. Yeah, well, so the thing that I'm often talking about when I'm saying if you need reassurance, to ask for it. And if someone asks for reassurance, then provide it. And if someone seems like they're upset, you might want to reassure them that you love them. The reason why I'm often saying this is because by default, typically, mainstream Americans, at least, the people that I tend to treat, will err very much on the side of, well, I told them I loved them last week, or I said the words that I loved them earlier today, without really recognizing the human need for attachment and reassurance. We are social creatures. We are desperately in need of reassurance and indications that we are worth it, that we are acceptable, that we are loved, that we are in secure relationships. We need constant reminders about this. And however you do that, you do that. But for most people, they are deprived of that because of our society, because of the notions that we teach people, because of the way our society is oriented towards very small configurations of relationships. You know, at best, you'll find that a typical family will have, two parents and one or two kids and a dog. That's not enough relationships. You need a lot of close relationships. It's great to have those relationships, but typically you need a lot of attachments, a lot of people in your life. 10, 20, 30, depending on your situation. But anyway, and a lot of people don't even have that, right? A lot of people are just living by themselves, or they will be in a marriage, but they're distant, right? And they have some friends and some coworkers, but they don't really have anyone. So we are operating at a massive deficit, and so what I believe to be optimal, or not even necessarily optimal, but baseline expectation for mental health and physical health is frequent reassurances. Now, a lot of times that can be nonverbal. It can be a hug, a kiss, a smile, hanging out together. And sometimes it's verbal. So that's what I'm saying. And it's not hard to reassure someone, right? It doesn't cost you anything to reassure someone. Now, having said that, if someone is frequently badgering you and blaming you and saying, you never say you love me, you deprive me, you withhold, you never reassure me, you never say, if they're yelling at you and being hostile to you, then that's not the best road to getting reassurance, right? But if someone approaches you and bids in a way that's non-accusatory and says, sorry for bothering you, but I'm feeling a little, I don't know what's going on, but I feel a little distant, and I just need some reassurance that you love me and that you prioritize me. No pressure, but if you can, something like that. So there's a lot of versions of that, obviously, but and when couples do that, well, any relationship, bosses and employees, friends, kids and parents, all of these relationships need that. And when that happens, research shows a lot of positive benefits occur. In the workplace, for example, there are mountains of evidence pointing at when bosses are reassuring or communicative to their employees about how the boss appreciates the subordinate and points out strengths, then productivity goes up, retention goes up, meaning that the employee is less likely to quit. You don't have to pay the employees as much. They don't demand. There's a lot of business benefits from that. So we can translate that into marriages and other kinds of relationships where, you just feel better about being in the relationship. You feel more secure. You're more likely to give reassurance. You're more likely to give benefit of the doubt to the other person. Better communication, better mood. Anyway. Stutz, so I reacted to Stutz, the documentary. Joanna says, do you think this therapist would appeal more to men? I know my husband was skeptical of therapy, but if he saw a therapist talk like this and be so action-minded, he would probably be more open to talking to them. End of comment. Yeah, I don't know, but anecdotally, I have found that. But I will say that regardless of gender, there are some people that either that's the point in their journey, or they have personality traits that point them in this direction. that they really, really want tools and pragmatic help. And they will come into therapy very hostile if they don't get something tangible out of every session. They have a bone to pick. It's one thing for a client to show up and be like, hey, I'm just kind of looking for some practical, but there are clients that show up and they're pretty upset because they've come from previous therapy scenarios where they felt like they didn't get enough of that. So they're already kind of angry about it. And so with those, it's complicated. There's a typical personality type that usually is, that I won't go into for now for time's sake, because it's almost dinner time. But there's a lot of people that will do that, and that's okay. And in my experience, that doesn't have anything to do with gender. Now, for some men that are, so why your husband is skeptical of therapy. So the question is why, right? And a frequent answer to that, due to toxic male socialization, indoctrination, essentially, that throughout his life he's been told that having emotions means he's weak, and to talk about his feelings means that he's weak and not a real man, and to ask for help, to subordinate yourself to someone else, to be like, I need your help because I don't know what to do with this, is to be like a woman. And that is awful, and you're not a real man if you ask for directions, for example, if you're lost while you're driving. So this is counter to go to therapy, is counter to their self-esteem. And if they have low self-esteem, then a lot of men will rely on toxic masculine traditions and presentations as a way of trying to grasp at self-esteem, because they feel terrible about themselves, and they can say, well, at the very least, I know that I'm a real man according to society. A lot of those toxic males, in fact, I would say every toxic male who is in that, who is presenting annoying toxic masculinity, they're doing it because they feel incredibly insecure about themselves, because of their early childhood development treatment, or even the way society is treating them because of their identity, that they are adopting this prescription of how to be a worthy human being that they've been told by society. I was raised well enough, and I have strong enough relationships that I don't need to prove myself as a man in this society, because I know that people love me regardless, right? But if I didn't know that, I might look for some avenue so that I can tell myself that I'm worthy of a human. Anyway, so might a therapist who markets themselves as, we don't talk about, silly things like emotions and the past, we get right to the point, and, tools, it's the Home Depot of therapy or something. Might that appeal to someone that is in that state? Yeah. Is that the answer to that man's problems? Depends. Good old Stella Annie says, my ex-boyfriend recommended I'd think of my negative inner voice as Donald Trump saying it, and I'd be less likely to believe it. It actually helped, smiley face. That's funny. Yeah, that's great. I've never heard of that one, actually. I might use that. I mean, I've used a similar thing of externalization, but to literally, let's all do this, okay? Go with me here. We all have an inner negative voice, that voice that tells us that we're stupid. I can't believe you said that thing last night. You're too ugly. Your clothes aren't right. You don't make enough money. You need to be da-da-da, whatever. Your teeth are I was on Reddit, and someone asked a question, why are my teeth yellow, or something like that? And all the expert, top comments were, teeth are naturally yellow. Because I was worried that I was going to see a bunch of people saying like, well, it's because you drank coffee or something. But what the experts were saying was that, teeth are supposed to be yellow. It's like asking why your skin is skin colored. Your teeth aren't supposed to be white. That doesn't, what in biology is just like white, right? So, but because of the marketers, they have effectively brainwashed us into believing that yellow teeth is disgusting. When I was growing up, that was not the case. I don't remember any teeth whitening products in the 70s and 80s. I started to see it in the 90s. I'm sure they existed back then, but I don't remember anyone using them or thinking about them. But because marketers are going to market, they have been bombarding us with images of, oh, disgusting yellow teeth and bright, ding ding, and you use this bleach or you do this plastic surgery. And yeah, it's awful. They've gotten to our heads. In 50 years, are we going to be walking around with, I don't know, I don't want to say because it'll be upsetting. But so why did I talk about that? Oh, your inner voice telling you that your teeth aren't white enough. And there are various different techniques of attacking it. So for yourself, you have that inner voice. Okay, put that aside. Now also think about the public figure, or maybe even someone in your life that you hate. A politician. How about someone on Love is Blind or 90 Day Fiance? Big Ed, for example, okay? Whoever seems to fit that when you have those voices in your head that are telling you that you're not good enough, that you imagine that it's Big Ed telling you, or it's Donald Trump telling you, or it's Alex Jones telling you, okay? You imagine that person telling you those things, and by its nature, you're like, well, I reject it because you're Alex Jones and you're an idiot. So now there are other methods of externalization. Sometimes you can name it something like, well, that's my mom because my mom criticized me a lot. So that voice feels like me, but really it's my mom. So I'm just going to call it my mom voice, or I'm going to call it the idiot voice or the dark voice. It's not me. It feels like me, but it's not me. It's this other thing, and that gives you the ability to scrutinize it and to protect yourself from it. So, but for you, Stella Annie, you got Donald Trump in your head. Manu says, you've met. So in that Stutz series, at some point, I talked again, as I will do sometimes, that the meaning of my life is centered around helping others and making the world a better place. And the main way in which I enact the purpose of my life currently is through this camera right here and this microphone, talking to you. And I can never know if I actually do make the world a better place, but I do think that I'm trying. I'm doing the best I can to try. I think that's what I was saying. And so a bunch of people said that I have helped you, and so Manu, Anna Rose, Corrine, and Catbird also said something. A lot of people said really, not, and really it does. I mean, it is appreciated. If no one said something, I think I'd be like, "What am I doing wrong?" It is my relationship with you, whatever we call it. The back and forth is a very real part of my life, like. Very real. It's very real to me. So these comments were very real to me. Manu says, you've massively influenced my life, my relationships, and my career path in a positive way. Glad I can be a product of your life goal. Right. So, saying, and other people said similar things, just like, well, let me help you with the meaning of your life by reassuring you this sort of thing. Now, as a therapist, we wrestle with this as well, that I'm just here doing what I can. You're the one doing the work. You're the one that wrestles with what I'm saying. You're the one that applies it. You're the one that even watches this channel. You're the one that is struggling and persevering and succeeding and going through it. I got my life that I'm struggling with. All I'm doing is I'm a catalyst or something. I'm this minor part, really. I'm a part, but you're the major part. You can't attribute it to me. As a therapist, that's how I see it. And I'm not alone in that perspective. A lot of therapists will feel similarly. I will appreciate the feedback that says that I was a part of it, and I will accept that, and I will gladly accept that, and I will revel in that, and I will bask in the warmth of that. But I also, one, don't want you to think that somehow I am or that I was the one that did those things, because you were the one that did those things. You were the one that made those steps. You were the one that ran with it. You were the one that maybe just needed to be reminded, the things that I'm not saying anything revolutionary. You might just be like, oh, you know what? Okay. That guy watching 90 Day Fiancé snuck in that little bit. And I already kind of knew that, but okay. And you ran with it. Also, I just philosophically want to be conceptually wise. So that's just another. Anyway, that does it for that episode. Everyone, please take care of yourself. Take care of others, because we all deserve it. We really, really, really do. Oh, wait. Someone sent a package. Jennifer actually sent something, so I thought I'd open it. Jennifer sent a letter, which is nice. I'll read that later. I really rely on your podcast daily for enlightenment and entertainment. And you say you're 51. I just turned not 51. So let's look at this. What's in here? Ooh. Wait. Is that candy? It looks like Star Wars 500 minis to collect. Is it candy or is it... Well, let's just open it. I'm trying to take off all this. Oh, okay. It has a big plastic thing on the outside. Okay. What is going on? Okay. And on the inside, it looks like maybe there's toys that you put together like Legos or something. What? Okay, I'm going to mess with that later. That confuses me and looks exciting. And there's some magnets. Oh, funny. So these are magnets that it looks like she made with pictures of us. This is me and Berto. Me and Stacy. You can't see it, but it's someone made a... So Stacy, my wife, is a model, and she, among all the various different modeling gigs that she had, she did a Harlequin or romance novel covers, where she would pose with some muscly guy, and they would take a picture, and then someone would paint it, and it would be the cover of this romance novel. And there's a number of them. We've managed to get a hold of a few of them, and I posted one of them online. And I think some people were a little anxious that there was another man holding Stacy, and so they put my face over the top. And so that's what that. But Jennifer, I'll tell you, these magnets will go to good use, because I love a good. My office door is metal, and I have a lot of magnets. I love a good magnet, so that's where those will go. But there's so many of them. There's like a whole pouch of them. And then there's all these guys, which I guess I'll open. This is such a mystery. So they're labeled K and S. Is this for Kirk and Stacy? So here's one for K, and let's open that. Oh, I just got chills. This is Star Wars little figures. This is a little C-3PO. What else did I get? Another K. This will be stuff in my back. Oh, and then a Thor hammer from Marvel. Wait, is that what's inside? Anyway. Okay, and then Stacy gets things, but I won't open those. It's a little display for these figures. So it's a little shelf. Anyway, if you want to send packages, you can do so. Often we put out a call for packages for our anniversary show, and we'll open them then. But I suppose anytime you want to send something, you can do so. The address should be below, or at least on our website. Thank you, Jennifer, and everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.